What's up, YouTube? It's your boy DC Movies here. Today I've got a very special video for you guys. Now, as you may or may not know, I'm kind of a big movie nerd myself. I've seen a ton of different movies. Of course, there's still some movies I haven't seen, but over the past couple years, I've seen a bunch of classics that I had never gotten around to seeing, so now I feel fully qualified to finally make a list like this. There are a couple reminders. Number one, these are just my personal favorites. So it's all just opinions. Don't get butthurt or too worked up if your favorite movies don't make this list. And feel free to leave a comment down below what your favorite movies are. Secondly, heavy spoiler warning for all of these movies. I'm going to try not to go too much in depth with these because this video will last forever if I did. But if you haven't seen one of these and you don't want to be spoiled, definitely feel free to skip through it. But yeah, I think I've gone over everything. I think it's time to get into some honorable mentions. So I've got 10 honorable mentions. Number 1, Casino Royale. Definitely the best James Bond movie. Number 2, Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows Part 2. Easily the best Harry Potter movie. Number 3, Independence Day. Just a classic alien summer blockbuster. Number 4, Oppenheimer. Easily the best movie of this year. Time will tell if it holds up. Number 5, Pirates of the Caribbean, Curse of the Black Pearl. The best Pirates movie, and Johnny Depp as Jack Sparrow is just iconic. Number 6, Pulp Fiction. Most people say it's Quentin Tarantino's best film, but it's not my personal favorite. You'll see that later. Number 7, The Incredibles. Probably my favorite Pixar film and a really good family superhero film. Number 8, The Lion King. Probably the best animated Disney film, but I don't really watch it anymore. Number 9, Titanic. Classic historical movie, but it is a bit long and I find myself only wanting to revisit the second half after the ship hits the iceberg. And number 10, X-Men Days of Future Past. The best X-Men movie and a very solid time travel movie. So I watched Stanley Kubrick's masterpiece for the first time just last year, and I was blown away immediately. I mean, sure, it is a very slow burn, but I definitely think it's worth it, especially for that extremely trippy final 20-ish minutes of the movie. The HAL 9000 computer is definitely the highlight for me though, because it's pretty unsettling to watch how conniving it is to the humans on board the ship, and plus its monotone voice just comes off as pretty creepy.
I'm sorry, Dave. I'm afraid I can't do that.
HAL's especially more relevant now, especially since AI has become more advanced and prevalent in today's society. It's also hard to believe that this movie was made back in the 60s because it still looks amazing to this day. All the practical effects and camera tricks Kubrick used really hold up well. So if you haven't seen this, I'll probably say this for all the movies, but if you haven't seen it, you have to see it at least once. So I watched 12 Angry Men for the first time in history class way back in middle school, and while I'm sure a lot of my fellow classmates were probably bored out of their minds, I definitely wasn't. This entire movie takes place inside one room and is gripping and captivating throughout its entire runtime. Let that sink in. The story is really simple too. It's just 12 jurors getting together to talk about the case of a young man being framed for murder, and they have to decide if he's guilty or not. But the screenplay is just top notch, as there isn't a single line of wasted dialogue throughout the runtime. Each character has their own unique traits that are fleshed out well enough, and the performances are fantastic. So even if you're skeptical of old black and white movies, I highly recommend you give this a try. Now, I watched this for the first time just a couple years ago by myself on a summer night, and I definitely don't suggest watching this with your parents because this movie is wild. It's 3 hours long of non-stop entertainment with so many raunchy moments and stuff like that, but so many things happen in this movie I can't even begin to explain all of it. It's got some iconic lines that I quote all the time, like,
I pump those numbers up. Those are rookie numbers in this racket.
and it's also really funny at times. The trip sequence comes to mind. But yeah, Leonardo DiCaprio hardly ever disappoints, and it's also crazy to think that this was based off of a true story. This is another example of why I waited to do this list for so long, because it's one of those classics I should have seen a long time ago, but I didn't even get around to it until like a year or two ago. This is your essential 80s action movie with Bruce Willis in his prime. There's barely any setup and you're thrown right into the fire when Alan Rickman's squad comes in, and his portrayal of Hans Gruber has to be one of the best villain performances I've ever seen. It's kind of similar to 12 Angry Men in how the whole movie takes place in one spot, but this time it's in a skyscraper instead of just one courtroom. The action is great from start to finish, and it's just super fun to watch Bruce Willis outsmart and slowly take out the bad guys. Our first sequel on this list is one I definitely prefer over the original. Don't get me wrong, the original's great, but this one is just a step above. Arnold Schwarzenegger as the Terminator is iconic, and he has so many memorable one-liners that I use all the time.
I'll be back.
Hasta la vista, baby.
The evil Terminator in this is such a threat to the point that you're constantly worried for the main character's safety, and if they can actually defeat him, which is kind of rare these days. The action once again is top-notch, and the storyline of the Terminator coming to the past to protect John Connor for the future is really cool. Once again, I feel like the developers of AI in real life have never seen this movie. Like, literally, you just gotta watch it and you will realize and see all of the huge red flags on why artificial intelligence can be a bad thing. I had a hard time choosing between this and the original Spider-Man. The original Spider-Man is one of the best superhero origin movies of all time, in my opinion. It has one of my favorite villains to ever grace the silver screen in Willem Dafoe's Green Goblin. But ultimately, I chose this sequel because we see our hero in full swing, pun intended, from the get-go. Now, I don't love the Spider-Man No More sequence of the film when he gives up his powers, but I get why it's there. Definitely fleshes the character out a bit more. And sequences like the train fight more than make up for it. This movie's a huge part of my childhood, so I had to include it. Now, this movie right here is the one that pushed me to make this list now, because I just watched this for the first time a couple weeks ago, and I wish I knew about it a long time ago. I was expecting it to be good, just because Brad Pitt and Morgan Freeman were in it together, and they're normally really good. So I was like, it has to be good, right? But even so, this still exceeded my expectations. I love a good murder mystery, and this one is very creative in its kills, even without showing you its kills and how it all relates to the 7 deadly sins. The atmosphere is also extremely dark and a huge part of the film. I've seen other people online say that the city this movie takes place in feels like Gotham before Batman shows up, and I definitely agree, especially since they never mention what city it is, so you can just imagine it to be Gotham. I knew about the iconic What's in the Box scene before I saw this movie, so I saw that part coming from a mile away.
What's in the box?
But it was still an amazing sequence and one of the best endings to a film I've ever seen. The opening scene of this movie is so famous that a lot of people forget the movie actually starts in the military graveyard. But seriously, Normandy Beach is such a gut-wrenching and realistic scene that it's many people's favorite of the entire movie, myself included. But that's not to say the rest of the movie sucks, because it wouldn't be on this list if it did. It's a great story of rescuing someone, and the team takes a nice journey through Nazi-occupied France. I'm a big sucker for World War II movies in general, so this one might be my favorite. From World War II to the Wild West we go, to my dad's favorite movie of all time and easily my favorite Western movie of all time. It's Tombstone at number 17. Now, being made in the 90s, it feels a bit more modern than a lot of older Westerns. I mean, obviously, right? But it still holds that classic Western vibe. Kurt Russell as Wyatt Earp is fantastic, and the other two Earp brothers are also great. But Val Kilmer as Doc Holliday is one of my favorite characters of all time. And me and my dad quote him all the time, from
I'm your huckleberry.
To
say when.
And we also quote other lines from the movie as well, such as,
You tell him I'm coming, and hell's coming with me, you hear?
Or,
Well, bye.
The OK Corral fight is awesome and makes you think, oh wow, that really did happen in real life. And the whole reckoning of the cowboy sequence is great, so yeah, this is easily the best Western I've ever seen. Now, if I had made this list a few years ago, back when Marvel was in its prime, and actually good, then this list would definitely feature more Marvel films, but I'll tell you right now, there's only 2, including this one. Captain America is my personal favorite superhero, and this movie is like a dream come true. Cap getting thrown into the modern day world where the government is turned against him in a political thriller is really cool, and he learns his best friend is still alive but is brainwashed into an assassin is also really compelling. The choreographed action is really good, and the Russo brothers did a great job of keeping this film grounded for the most part, so it's my favorite standalone Marvel film. So most people would put The Empire Strikes Back on this list, and while I do agree that's a great film, I was actually choosing between this and Revenge of the Sith. I have a ton of nostalgia for Revenge of the Sith, and I think it has the best lightsaber fights out of all the Star Wars films, but the dialogue and acting and overuse of CGI is pretty cringe at times, so I can't in my right mind put it in a top 25 list, unfortunately. I also have a ton of nostalgia for Return of the Jedi, but I think it's a better film overall than Revenge of the Sith. We finally get to see Luke at the height of his Jedi powers face off against Darth Vader. We finally see the Emperor for the first time and how evil he is. We finally see the rebels blow up the Death Star.
Wait a minute!
No, but at least the way they do it is different this time. I love the final 3 battles that take place simultaneously in this, though. I mean, you've got the space battle, you got the ground battle, and the lightsaber battle. And the Phantom Menace copied this idea, but Return of the Jedi did it better in my opinion. I know some people think this is a bit childish at times because of the Ewoks, but I don't really mind them, and I think this does a great job of wrapping up the original trilogy plus the prequels. If only Disney didn't make the sequels. So this movie is normally pretty high on the greatest movies of all time list, you know? So sorry for following that stereotype, but yeah, it's that good. Honestly, this entire trilogy could have made it because it's one of the best trilogies of all time and is definitely the best fantasy trilogy ever. If one word comes to mind when describing this movie, it's epic. Frodo and Ben finally succeed in their quest to destroy the ring, while Aragorn and company fight armies and defeat Sauron. My only gripe with this movie is the final 20 to 30-ish minutes where there's like 5 different endings. Like, come on, bro, the movie's already over 3 hours long. Did you really have to do that? But nonetheless, it's a fantastic movie. It was really hard for me to choose between this and Endgame. Endgame is the perfect conclusion to a 10-year storytelling arc, and the highs are extremely high. It has so many payoffs in the last act, but it requires the viewer to be well knowledgeable of the MCU, and it's probably not as rewatchable as Infinity War, even though I saw it 4 times in theaters. So overall, I think Infinity War is the better movie. It's the ultimate Avengers team-up movie. Like, it is just incredible how they were able to balance so many different characters and give each their chance to shine, and their interactions are pretty great too. Mainly, I'm thinking of Thor meeting the Guardians. That's pretty memorable, and that's the thing about this movie. It has its typical MCU humor, but it doesn't undercut the drama because this movie has such high stakes. I mean, even a main character actually dies for once. But yeah, it's really impressive how, despite the massive scale of this movie, it doesn't feel bloated. I think they were pretty smart in splitting up the teams between the Titan group, where there's Iron Man, Spider-Man, Doctor Strange, and the Guardians, and then the Wakanda group, where there's Captain America, Black Panther, Black Widow, Hulk, and others. The MacGuffin story of collecting the stones was smart too, as it was easy to follow. Thanos is easily one of, if not the best MCU villain, and the battles in this movie were just insane. Mainly the Doctor Strange versus Thanos fight. Even though it was short, that was probably my favorite part of the movie. Also, the cliffhanger of half the universe getting dusted was pretty much the equivalent from my generation of Empire Strikes Back's cliffhanger, where you learned Darth Vader was Luke's father back in the 80s. I remember there being an audible gasp throughout the theater when they started getting dusted, and the theater was dead silent when the credits rolled. I know I said a lot about this movie, but other than Endgame, I don't think I've ever been as hyped for a movie to come out because of all the anticipation and build up to it. It was certainly an event for the ages. The Matrix changed the game, plain and simple. After it came out, you saw so many movies, shows, and other stuff copying The Matrix because it was so original and innovative. The whole concept of being trapped inside a digital world is so fascinating and scary. Agent Smith is a very intimidating villain. The fight choreography is great. The action sequences are great. I mean, there's not much else to say about this movie, and I can get why it's my brother's favorite movie of all time. Once again, I think it should be required for people working on AI to have watched this movie at least once so that they can understand why AI can be bad. So, most of the movies so far, say maybe 12 Angry Men, have had fairly large stories and stakes and casts and whatnot, but Whiplash is not that type of movie. It's mostly about the conflict between two people, Miles Teller's Andrew and J.K. Simmons' Terrence Fletcher. It's kind of similar to a sports story. Our protagonist has a passion. In this case, he wants to be the best jazz drummer in the world, so he works on his craft and gets recognized by the best jazz instructor, who's J.K. Simmons' character, Fletcher, and he has a chance to prove himself in his band. But Fletcher's teaching methods are anything but normal.
Not quite my tempo.
I mean, this guy constantly abuses Andrew, both mentally and verbally, and it's absolutely brutal. But Andrew doesn't give up, and he eventually does become the monster musician Fletcher was desperately trying to create. The final scene that takes like 20-ish minutes is one of my favorite endings to any movie ever, and it still gives me goosebumps. For how down to earth this movie is, it's really intense. I might be a little biased since I used to play trumpet in jazz band, but even if you're not a musician, I think most people would enjoy this. Our second movie on this list from the dynamic duo of Leonardo DiCaprio and Martin Scorsese. When I was younger, I was scared to watch this movie because I thought it was a horror movie and the trailer kind of freaked me out. So I didn't get around to it until I was about probably 19 or 20, and I really wish I watched it sooner because it's an instant classic. It's more of a detective thriller, but because it takes place on an isolated insane asylum, it definitely gives off some creepy vibes. It's really engaging and fun to follow, and it probably has one of the best twists I've ever seen in the movie, because when the first time I watched it, I was genuinely shocked. And because of that twist, it's a completely different viewing experience the second time, and I love that about it. Time travel in movies has been done countless times, but it's never been done this well. I mean, think about it. Why is every other time travel movie compared to this one? It's because it's the gold standard. Our leads of Doc and Marty are so likable and one of the best duos in movie history. I mean, their chemistry is off the charts. It's such a heartwarming and exciting movie, and I'm pretty sure everyone who's seen it has at least imagined themselves going back in time to meet their own parents once. I think part 2 is just as good, but it's hard to beat the original. So this is and has been IMDb's #1 rated movie for a while now, and it's easy to see why once you've watched it. I had always heard it was great, but I didn't know too much detail about it before watching it, so I was a little surprised that the story is told from Morgan Freeman's character's perspective, which was a bonus since he got to narrate a lot of it and he's the best narrator around. The story is about Tim Robbins' character, Andy, getting framed for murder and trying to escape prison. Pretty simple, right? But it's a lot more nuanced and complicated than that. There's deeper themes in here of institutionalization and how men who have been in prison for a long time eventually become scared of the outside world when it's finally time for their parole. There's also corrupt wardens and guards, and without going into too much detail, Andy's escape sequence was incredibly satisfying. It also has its fair share of iconic quotes, mainly,
"Get busy living, or get busy dying."
The acting is stellar, and this is a movie that everyone has to see at least once. Another 90s classic, Forrest Gump. Right off the bat, Forrest Gump has to be Tom Hanks' best performance ever, in my opinion. It may be a fictional story, but it is incredible how much real U.S. history you go through in this. It's an absolute ride. There are so many different story arcs in this, it's almost hard to keep track of. Of course, you got Gump playing football for Alabama. He joins the Army, fights in Vietnam, plays ping pong for the Army, goes on tour. You go through the JFK assassination, Martin Luther King Jr. civil rights movement, Bubba Gump Shrimp Company, even running across America nonstop for 3 years. I mean, the list goes on and on. There are so many great characters, from Lieutenant Dan to Jenny to Bubba. This movie is super quotable, quoted all the time.
Life was like a box of chocolates. You never know what you're gonna get.
And it has its sad moments too. It's a very emotionally rich movie, and it's pretty much perfect. There's not much else to say. I'm I'm sure some of you watching might know I'm a huge Christopher Nolan fan and were wondering when one of his movies were going to show up. Honestly, I love all of his movies because he hasn't made a single bad one, and I could have included more on this list. Interstellar is by far my favorite space movie. First of all, the visual effects are mind-blowing. From the wormhole sequence to the ice planet, the wave planet, the black hole, it's all incredible. Secondly, the whole Einstein's theory about relativity and time dilation was used really well, and it leads to one of the most heartbreaking scenes in the whole movie where Cooper's watching recordings of his kids grow up. All the actors are great. Also, it was pretty funny how Matt Damon wasn't teased in any of the trailers or anything, so you had no idea he would show up and become the main antagonist at one point. But the emotional connection between Murph and Cooper is probably the strongest part of the movie. The ethical dilemma of saving an entire species or getting to see your loved ones again for the last time is gut-wrenching. I haven't mentioned soundtracks yet, but when Hans Zimmer's score is playing during the docking sequence, that gives me goosebumps every time. I know a lot of people like to pick apart the ending and the black hole fifth dimension Tesseract sequence, but I really don't mind it, and I find it pretty fascinating even if it's unrealistic at times, so yeah, this is one of Nolan's best movies. While most people would have Pulp Fiction as Tarantino's best movie, for me, it's gotta be Inglourious Basterds. Like I said earlier, I'm a sucker for World War II movies, so seeing Quentin put his spin on it, it immediately became one of my favorites. The dialogue in this movie might be the best in any movie ever. Christoph Waltz, the main villain, I'm pretty sure he speaks like 4 different languages fluently in this movie, which is just really impressive. The opening scene of him talking to that French farmer searching for Jews while he's hiding Jews right underneath them is a masterclass of tension building, and there have been countless video essays discussing it already, so go watch one of those if you're interested. Brad Pitt as Lieutenant Aldo Rain is also hilarious in this movie. One of his lines always comes to mind.
You're alarming.
It has so many great chapters as Tarantino likes to do it, such as the basement bar scene known as Operation Kino, or the theater burning down with Hitler inside known as Revenge of the Giant Face. Like, pretty much every scene in this is golden and has quotable lines. The final line is literally,
I think this just might be my masterpiece.
Which isn't very subtle, so you already know how Quentin feels about it himself, and I have to agree with him. I was super close to including all 3 Indiana Jones movies on this list. We don't talk about numbers 4 and 5. But ultimately, for variety's sake, I went with my personal favorite, which is The Temple of Doom. I know Temple of Doom is probably the most polarizing of the 3 and is a lot of people's least favorite. It has a lot darker tone than the other 2, but that's what makes it even more interesting to me. It's a prequel to Raiders of the Lost Ark, and it feels more standalone as the majority takes place in this Indian palace. My main gripe with the movie is the Willie character. She can be pretty annoying at times, but I can look past that because Short Round makes up for it by being my favorite Indiana sidekick. The set design of the temple itself is really good and definitely gave me some nightmares as a kid. The final 30 to 45 minutes of this is also basically non-stop action. From the cave fights to the rail cars to the bridge collapse, it's all really enjoyable. Indiana Jones is one of the best action heroes of all time, and this is the best adventure trilogy of all time, hands down. First of all, Jurassic Park has the best theme song of all time, hands down. Secondly, the dinosaur animatronics in this were groundbreaking at the time and have never been better. Third, this movie is the reason why so many kids have gone through dinosaur phases. It is far and away the best dinosaur movie, and I don't think anything will ever top it. It's also the best movie Steven Spielberg's made, in my opinion. So many iconic scenes, from the T-Rex getting loose to the Velociraptor kitchen scene, and there's really never a dull moment. Sam Neill as Dr. Alan Grant is a great lead, and the supporting cast is great too. Jeff Goldblum has some memorable lines in here too.
Life, finds a way.
You crazy son of a bitch, you did. God creates dinosaurs. God destroys dinosaurs. God creates man. Man destroys God. Man creates dinosaurs.
It's truly lightning in a bottle and an extremely rewatchable film. Also, this is kind of similar to the AI-focused movies in the sense that if science discovers a way they can actually recreate dinosaurs, just watch this movie and find out why that's not a good idea. These top 2 movies have consistently been my top 2 movies for a long time, and at this point, I don't know if they'll ever move from their spots. At number 2, I have Inception. It's Christopher Nolan doing a high-concept heist movie that takes place inside people's dreams, and Leonardo DiCaprio is the lead. I mean, what more can you ask for? When I saw this for the first time as a 10 or 11-year-old, it definitely took me a few watches to really comprehend it because so much information is thrown at you. And I can see the argument against this movie as there's a ton of exposition and it can be confusing at times, but I really don't care because I love these type of thought-provoking movies. You throw in some really cool-looking action sequences, a mysterious backstory for our main character, a great score, great cast, resonating ending, and you've got one of the greatest original sci-fi blockbusters of all time. The Dark Knight might just be my most watched movie of all time. I've seen this thing so many times, I guarantee you I could literally recite the entire thing word for word from memory while watching it. And that shows 2 things. Number 1, how good it is and that I'm able to watch it countless times without ever getting tired of it. And number 2, how memorable it is with so many iconic quotes that mainly come from the Joker.
You wanna know how I got these scars?
Why so serious?
Whatever doesn't kill you simply makes you stranger.
There are so many reasons why this movie is good, so I'll just list out a few. Number 1, it may be a comic book movie, but it's a grounded crime thriller too, and that just makes it feel so much more real and not a bunch of sky beams and CGI and one-liners. Sorry, Marvel. Number 2, the cast is incredible. Christian Bale is probably the best Bruce Wayne we've ever gotten. Heath Ledger is definitely the best Joker we've ever gotten. Even Aaron Eckhart as Harvey Dent gives a phenomenal performance. Number 3, there are so many iconic set pieces from the street chase that ends up with the truck flip, the Hong Kong skyhook sequence, the ferry sequence. I could go on and on. The ending always gives me goosebumps as we see him riding off on the bike with that score playing. I don't think I'll ever get tired of this movie, so it's an easy number 1 choice for me. That is going to wrap up my list. Leave a comment down below on which picks you agree with, and feel free to share what your favorite movies of all time are. Also, consider subscribing if you haven't already. I hope you guys enjoyed watching, and I'll see you in the next one.